Quintin Upson. Welcome back to Quintin's Close-Ups.
Thanks for having me.
You're very
How you
welcome.
been?
Oh, busy, just like you.
Yeah, definitely.
How do you define Brandon Upson these days?
So first and foremost, just like the last time, as a father and a husband, that is the driving force of what I do. You know, I have three little ones, 3, 4, and 5.
Yeah.
They're, they're not slowing down in their growth. But I understand that the work that I do today will be passed on to them, and anything that's undone and unsettled today, they will have to solve later.
Later.
So I've seen my work evolve from just, running campaigns or raising hell because of some issue to now being more solutions driven and understanding that my children are going to inherit the earth and the climate, the environment that it's in. They're going to inherit the social, economic conditions of our country, and they're also going to inherit anything that I do personally that impacts our name and my legacy. So I've been focused on that, and it's evolved. I think I'm getting a little older.
I bet you are. What is the state of politics now?
Man, here in South Carolina, I would say the state of politics is evolving, and as quickly as it's evolving, a lot of it has stayed the same. When you look at other places in the country where the state of politics are shifting at a rapid pace, there's a lot of progression happening because we are in a state that fights back against change. Any small incremental change is felt in a larger scale here. So when we see the impact of the progressive left in South Carolina, when you look at our revolution and what they've done, even with the state Democratic Party flipping some of the county seats, we're seeing more people getting added and new ideas coming to the forefront, and a lot more progressive thought than we would have expected in the past. But I believe that the state as a whole is still led from the top down and not the grassroots up.
And I know obviously you wanted to be on Quintin's Close-Ups to talk about the recent race, which was the first in South primary, and how it changed the political landscape in our state. And I know that you were obviously Tom Steyer's national organizing director.
Yeah.
How organized was the first in the South primary in your mind?
Oh my goodness. The first in the South primary was the biggest and most robust experience I've ever had in my political career. Back in October, the campaign made a strategic move to bring me here full time to make sure that we had a good showing. And even at that time, we were just hoping to be able to be viable in the state, not thinking that at one point we were within striking distance of winning. South Carolina played, and as we see now, hindsight is 2020, but played the most impactful role in this presidential campaign than any other state had before. And I believe once we get to November, we'll see that South Carolina was probably the most instrumental state in this competition.
And obviously, you were the national organizing director, as I just mentioned, for Tom Steyer's presidential campaign. And I know you have been able to really be a political magician as far as helping win a lot of these long shot races. Where was your magic here in South Carolina?
So the magic was, so when you look at what presidential campaigns typically do, especially Democratic ones coming into South Carolina, they come to the state with all their resources, their money, their attention. They bring a lot of staff with them, and then they hire a few of our most talented and brightest. But then when they leave with their resources, their money, their people, but they also take our brightest and talented folks with them as well, which over time leaves a gap and a void in our infrastructure. I believe that, a lot of people say that South Carolina is ruby red, but I believe it's pretty purple. It is a very competitive state. The only reason we haven't shifted to that purple state, a state that can be very competitive, is because we lack that infrastructure. So what I wanted to do with this race was invest on the ground. I understand that the people closest to the problems are the ones closest to the solution. I wanted to develop everyday folks in every corner of the state and make investments unlike any other presidential campaign ever has. And luckily, I was working with someone with resources where I could do that.
Sure.
So when we launched the campaign in July, in August, I made the strategic decision to invest in African American media, black owned media. So if you look at it, I think we spent about $175,000 across the state in black media outlets, more than tripling the investment of all the other campaigns into those media outlets. I think that's absolutely necessary because if you don't own your narrative, and I'm talking about as a community, you lose control of the direction and even the impact that it has. And we are seeing a lot of our black-owned media outlets not just struggling, but disappearing year over year. So we were able to do that. And at the end of it, we had 130 staff on the ground. You know, about 80% of them were South Carolinians. Mm-hmm. At one point, about 98% of my staff were South Carolinians. 50% were organizing within 10 miles of where they were born. You know, that's unheard of. So what we're leaving behind now is the framework for the political infrastructure we'll need to make additional gains in the years to come.
You talk about that narrative for the black media. What was Tom Steyer's narrative for South Carolinians?
Yeah. So his narrative was, and I hate being repetitive in the use of the word, but if you don't control your narrative, if you don't have a positive narrative, you don't get the policy that you need in order to undo some of the long-held systematic barriers to progress. For one instance, one thing that we were talking about is expanding the black middle class. In South Carolina, you can go into Aiken County where I'm from, and you can find folks, you know, white people who are living in the most destitute conditions, you know, living hand to mouth. And when a Republican candidate says that they're fighting for the middle class, they say, oh, they're fighting for me. I'm in that middle class. But you'll find black folks in those same situations or a little better who feel like being a part of the middle class is completely out of their reach. So we have a situation where there's two stories. Folks in the same boat but feel that they can't get to the same shore. So how do you change that? And how do you remove those barriers that have created this mentality that the opportunity of America is out of reach for me and my family? So that's what the conversation was about. And that's how we started gaining traction. Mm-hmm. You know, if you could really buy an election, he would have won Iowa, he would have won New Hampshire, he would have won Nevada, and he would have won South Carolina. But this race showed that you can't buy an election. If you don't have a message that's connected with people, no amount of money will make it do so.
How did his message connect with the South Carolina residents?
Yeah, it connected because here in South Carolina, we did something unique. When Tom announced in July, his first trip was here, right, remember? And our first stop was North Charleston. Right. Our second stop was Denmark, South Carolina. Right. Our third stop was Georgetown and Aner, right?
Love Georgetown.
Yes. So we went and took him to the places where it wasn't the traditional stops, Charleston, Columbia, and Greenville. Right. We went into those places where people were struggling for various reasons, economically, environmentally, and socially. And he had those kitchen table conversations, literally at their kitchen table, talking about what they were facing. in a way that was very unique to him. 7 years prior, he had been doing town halls around the country in some of the most poor and impoverished zip codes around the country. But he never had that opportunity to sit at somebody's kitchen table with a mother saying, my child is terminally ill. There's a procedure that could save her life. To pay for that, we haven't been able to pay for our rent for 4 months. Our lights are literally being kept on because of the church. We can't even afford food, but we put everything into saving our child's life. Those stories is what changed Tom Steyer, shaped his message, and allowed him to speak directly to the hearts and the minds of South Carolinians. And that's how it came.
How did it change you personally?
Yeah. I never thought that I would be able to be, first, I never thought I would be on a presidential campaign, right? After the ups and downs of my own political career, I never felt I would have the opportunity to make the changes that I wanted to see, not just in the world, but in South Carolina. Okay. It made me feel like, again, anything was possible. And that I not only had the skill set to do it, but the opportunity to do it was much larger and much broader and could have an even deeper and more profound impact in the world that I'm living in. So it gave me hope.
Hope. And I know earlier you talked about barriers. How many barriers did Tom Steyer knock down in South Carolina?
Oh my goodness. I'll mention one in particular. There's a group called the Vision Walkers.
Yeah.
And the Vision Walkers is a group of over 300, maybe 400 guys and women, right, across the state. And they are made up of young people who have had, sordid past. Many of them have, arrest records. And they have all come together to make a commitment to rebuild their communities. Many campaigns wouldn't touch them with a 10-foot pole, but we gave them an opportunity. And because we gave them an opportunity, Tom literally could walk into any neighborhood across South Carolina and be welcome. I saw young guys on Facebook and on Instagram talking about South Carolina, or talking about Tom Steyer in a way that I never would have imagined. There were young folks like me who thought that there wasn't an opportunity here to impact the political system, who now believe they can. There's a young man from the Vision Walkers who he was helping me a lot, like one of my assistants on the campaign, Alonzo. And Alonzo went from being a gang leader to now being a community organizer. If you have to define barriers, that mental barrier to make that transition is the biggest one to knock down. And this campaign did it. And last night we were at dinner, he was sharing with me how this campaign has literally changed his life. And he wants to do everything in his power to make sure that we win in South Carolina for his family.
And obviously I want to go back to the quote that you said, and it was really repeated throughout the campaign. It was this: the people who are the closest to the problem are closest to the solution. What exactly was Tom Steyer's problem here in South Carolina?
The problem in South Carolina is that the idea of hope, as we breathe, we hope.
Sure.
That has been torn down systematically in select communities across the state. And the problem that he wanted to undo was that system that he felt was bought and paid for by corporations. Here in South Carolina, we can talk about Denmark, South Carolina, where the people were being poisoned by the water that they're drinking. Not out of, convenience or necessity, but because there's a company who produces a chemical that they make money off of when it's used. And because they produce this, they're putting their profits over the people who are ingesting it, right? So he wanted to, and going back to our slogan, people over profits, he wanted to tear down that corrupt system so that we can make a more just system for people to be able to flourish and access the opportunities, both physically, financially, and holistically.
Did Tom Steyer just have a lot of money, or did he really did have momentum here?
He had momentum. And look at the previous contests, or look at all the ones in Super Tuesday. There are 4 early states.
Right.
14 states participate, or 14 competitions in Super Tuesday. There's only one that was won by a Democratic candidate who happened to be a billionaire. That was American Samoa.
Right.
If you can purchase momentum, it would have been a clean sweep, because Bloomberg spent more than 2 times as much money as Tom did. Neither of them are on the way to being the Democratic nominee. So what made South Carolina different was our ground game. We hired people from the communities to organize our communities. We didn't parachute people in from other states. We didn't bring in folks who didn't look like the community or understand the community that they were working in. We literally hired from the communities that we wanted to ask and earn their vote. One of the things that we did entirely different was where we placed our campaign offices. Never in the last 30 years has a political campaign, presidential campaign, put an office in Hampton, South Carolina. We did. A campaign in the last 30 years haven't put an office in Georgetown, South Carolina. We did, and I can go on and on across the state in these rural communities where we really worked hard at. Winsboro, South Carolina. We did a lot of work in Winsboro, Greenwood, all across the state. Hopkins was a big area for us, even Aiken.
Oh, yes.
And we had to do that differently. We had to show folks that we cared enough to come there and earn their vote. There are some things where people believe, because I have this track record, that I'm endowed to have your vote. I deserve it. There's some folks that say, well, all I have to do is ask for it, and that's enough. We thought that we literally had to get on the ground and earn every single vote. And there were 60,000 people that agreed with this. Now, the politics of it, I believe that we would have done a lot better if our congressmen, didn't speak and get involved. But that you have to respect the influence of Congressman Clyburn. He really not just tipped the scales, but he reshuffled the deck for this election. And I think he saved Joe Biden's candidacy. He's going to go in history for deciding the next president of the United States.
What would have saved Tom Steyer's candidacy?
If Congressman Clyburn would have sat on the sidelines, one, right? But two, I believe that if he would have started earlier, if we would have started 2 to 3 months earlier, we would have been more competitive soon. And we would have had more time to gain traction and build an operation that could have scaled out to where we needed it. Also, we never thought that we were going to win Iowa or New Hampshire. Never. We knew that Tom had a infrastructure and a base and some name recognition in Nevada, South Carolina, and in Super Tuesday states because the next gen need to impeach, so on and so on. If we could have come out and just said it plainly, hey guys, we understand that this isn't it. We're not going to invest a ton of money and resources there, but our strategy is on these 2 states and beyond, and made those investments in time, people, and money early on and just focused on those states like a laser, I think that would have made a big, big difference in how we performed and even where we are
The juvenile concert. What was that all about?
All right. So we were at Allen University. We spent a lot of time in
Right.
HBCUs, right? Juvenile was one of our performers, as well as DJ Jazzy Jeff and Yolanda Adams. So we had a good mix. So Juvenile, everyone wanted to hear his song, Back That Thing Up. But he stated that he wasn't going to perform that until Tom came on stage.
Mm.
So Tom came on stage, and Juvenile said, well, Tom, I want you to sing this song with me. And Tom was like, well, I'm not going to sing, but, I'll dance. And Tom is a fun person. And you can see his entire family. They're very genuine, right? And Juvenile changed the words from back that thing up to back that vote up.
Okay.
And he endorsed Tom on the stage.
Wow.
And, that's the only part that you catch is Tom dancing and Juvenile singing. But it was just a very unplanned, genuine, sporadic moment that happened. And it was just all fun.
Fun.
And I honestly believe that it was one of those things that only could happen in South Carolina. I don't think it hurt us at all. I really don't. If there's ever a time to start trending, it's the day before an election day, And there were people in my inbox who were like, I was undecided until I saw this. I'm voting for Tom. He looks like a great guy. And yeah, it was a very unplanned and
Okay.
genuine moment.
Okay. You said that obviously the juvenile concert did not hurt you all.
Mm.
Did need to impeach hurt your campaign?
I would say in some ways, yes. Uh, the reason I would say yes is because we didn't want Tom to be a one note candidate. We didn't want him to be defined by need to impeach only. And it took us a while to carve out our lane in this campaign when he got in. President Obama once said that it took him 6 months to figure out how to be a candidate, right? On election day, Tom had been in the campaign for 7 months.
Right.
So we were just really getting started. But what need to impeach allowed us to have was a certain group of folks who understood where Tom's heart was. And they came on board and were some of our most loyal and dependable volunteers because of the work they did with me to impeach prior. I believe that if we would have started a little sooner, even more of our need to impeach community would have been on board. But they were all over the place. Kamala, Bernie, Biden. But the ones who stayed with Tom were truly loyal because they knew that he was a man who would fight for what was right, no matter who was against him or what the political odds were.
Let me ask you plainly,
Please.
who do you support now?
I haven't put my support behind anyone. What I'm focused on right now, I'm going to have a meeting with Tom soon. But I know I'm going to be here in South Carolina a long time. I'm a Southern boy, born and bred, and my focus, honestly, is on flipping the South. I believe that, like South Carolina, there are a number of other states across the South who would be purple, competitive states, battleground states, if the work and investment was made in them. And because over time, people have just written these states off as red states. People have written them off as being ruby red. I like to call them pretty purple because the demographic shifts are happening. There is no movement, and the political infrastructure is not growing, it's actually disintegrating. And folks are losing hope because their races run year after year with great candidates who don't get the financial support to be able to run competitive races. So, what I would like to see is a Southern campaign to move our Southern states forward. Look at what happened in Georgia. No one thought that Georgia would ever be a competitive state for a Democratic candidate, especially statewide or for governor, but it was. No one thought that in recent history for Florida, because Florida is now put back into the R column, right? Into Andrew. So what about these other southern states? We have some very competitive United States Senate seats coming up. We have to protect our House seats that we have and that we flipped in 2018. But there are some local races that can be done because we have to do a couple of things. We have to go through redistricting, which is huge, and we have to get the courts, the federal courts, back in line. So there's a lot of work that can be done, and I think the South is the biggest area for opportunity for Democrats across the country.
Where is this political infrastructure?
Yeah. So that's the question. And the political infrastructure right now is bare bones because investment has not been made. You know, when you think about the mechanisms to create a bench of candidates, there is none. Right now, we have the Clyburn Fellows here in South Carolina, but that's only a dozen a year, right? There is no mechanism for getting your message out. There is no mechanism for reaching large scale people and moving them in any direction. There is no mechanism in place to even push back against the Republican march throughout this state. So when we look at the infrastructure, it still has to be built. I can only name a dozen or a little more than a dozen organizations that are camped out here in South Carolina, and even less than that who actually have a brick and mortar operation here to build infrastructure across the state. But if you go next door to North Carolina, there's about 100 of them, right? Georgia's largest one right now is Stacey Abrams' organization, but that's because she had the notoriety and recognition, and now she's raising the money to do it. So who's going to do it for South Carolina, Tennessee, Alabama, Mississippi? You know, so those are the questions that need to be answered because if we don't have the infrastructure, we're going to lose the South.
How many more questions, looking back now, do you have about the campaign?
Because I was, in such a senior role,
Right.
I don't have a lot of questions
Okay.
because I knew, I was part of the development of it, so I was able to know what those answers were. But the only lingering question I would have would be, what would have happened? Those shoulda, coulda, wouldas. What would have happened if we would have started 2 to 3 months earlier? If we would have had or a small shift in our strategy, and if we would have used the strategy that I implemented here all across the country, I think that we would have seen a different outcome, personally.
Okay. Well, Brandon Upson, thank you so much for your time. And again, welcome back to Quintin Stokes House.
Thank you. Glad to be here. Look forward to doing it again.
Yes, sir. I'll be here. Yes, sir.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.